Right now this is a 22 by 22 6-ply maple tube. We need to make an 18 by 22 bass drum out of it with re-rings. So first we're going to cut 2 re-rings that are going to be 1.5 inches deep each, and then we're going to cut this down to its final dimension of 18 by 22. Okay, now that the re-rings are cut, I'm going to look at the shell and pick the side that I think has the more interesting grain, and that's going to be the side we keep. Cut off the other side, which I think I like this side better. So we're going to keep that, cut off the other side. Here we go. Before we install these re-rings, I like to put them on the sanding table to get rid of any tooling marks or any burns in the wood, and also to just make sure that the edges are nice and flat before we install them. So the first step here is to cut this so that we can fit it into the drum shell. And when choosing where to cut on the ring, I usually look for any imperfections or voids in the shell, because this is a good opportunity to cut those out. So here we go. So now that this is cut, I'm going to clamp it into the shell and look at how much it overlaps and use that to mark how much material we're going to need to remove. Now that we've removed the necessary material, I'm going to use this oscillating belt sander to square up the edges and then just remove material a little bit at a time until we get a nice tight fit. Before we glue in the re-rings, sometimes I like to mask off the outside of the shell with a little bit of tape to protect it from any glue squeeze out. The problem with doing that is when you take the tape off, it can leave a pretty rough surface on the wood. On the other hand, if you don't do that, you can wind up with glue seeping into the wood and you don't really see it until you go to dye the shell and there's spots of the wood that won't take any dye. So it's kind of a trade-off, but since I'm going to dye this shell a dark walnut color, I figure we'll go ahead and go with the tape. Alright, we're going to apply glue to this ring, we're going to install it in the shell, and we're going to clamp the hell out of it. Now that this is all clamped up, we're going to let it dry. Once the glue is fully cured, we're going to take it back to the table saw with the roller jig and square up this edge, and then we're going to repeat the process on the other side of the drum. Before the last clamp goes over the seam, I'll usually take a small cut off from a piece of shell that's wrapped with packing tape, and I use that as a clamping caul to go over the seam to make sure that the seam lies together flat. Just like this. Alright, there you have it. That's pretty much the process, regardless of what size drum you're working on. As for why we put re-rings in the first place, with plywood shells such as this, as opposed to steam bent shells, re-rings are not structurally necessary. But they do impact the sound in a way we like. It adds some punch, some focus to the sound of the drum, and it also gives you a little bit more wood to cut the bearing edges, so you have more options there. And it's just something we like to do, especially with bass drums. So if you have any questions, feel free to hit us up, and we'll see you next time.